This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights, where we bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today, we welcome Christy Asbee. She's the director of the PAAT, and PAVA programs here at DRNY. And we're going to discuss the accessibility requirements for snow and ice removal in New York State. Christy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And so today we're going to start out also with our audio-visual descriptions of ourselves. Christy, you want to start?
Yes. I am a white woman. I have dark blonde hair. I'm wearing a green sweater.
And I am a white woman with wavy brown hair, and I have a gray turtleneck on today. And I don't know if we can see my earrings. I generally have long earrings on, and I do today, if you can see them. And so, Christy, let's start by talking about, we live in New York State, and there are a lot of different areas, especially when it comes to snow. Some areas will see a ton of snow, others may see it for a day and then it's gone. But regardless of where you're living in this state, let's talk about the accessibility requirements for snow and ice removal and the different regions. How does that factor in?
Well, New York is a state with very old infrastructure, and inherently in lots of areas in upstate especially, but throughout the state really, there are sidewalks that are very old. They probably haven't been maintained by the municipality in the way that we would want them to be, or we would expect them, quite frankly, to be, given that the the Americans with Disabilities Act does require ongoing maintenance of the pedestrian pathway program. And what we see often in New York is that there is a heavy reliance by the municipalities on the municipal zone city ordinance or town ordinance requirements, which just usually say that the adjacent property owner to the sidewalk or pedestrian pathway must keep the sidewalks and curb cuts clear of any snow or ice. Generally, you see that city ordinance have a requirement 12 to 24 hours after the last snowfall, an adjacent property owner has to clear the pedestrian pathway.
And thank you for making the point about the municipalities and their interpretation of the responsibility for these areas, right? Where if you're a homeowner in a city, and there's a sidewalk that is in front of your home, and it is not cleared, as a homeowner, how are we to know if we're the ones who are responsible, or will the city come and take care of it? I will say oftentimes I've seen sidewalk areas being cleared by a homeowner, and then the snow plows come through and all the snow comes right back on the sidewalk. So it is certainly not a one and done situation here. Talk a little bit about that.
Listen, the ultimate responsibility falls on the municipality, whether it's big city or a small town. If there is a pedestrian pathway system that connects people in their community through the non-vehicular traffic or methods of travel, then the municipality has a responsibility to maintain that program so that it is accessible to all people. That's the bottom line. However, the municipalities do not want that burden, so of course they require that the burden is shared with the property owners, and that's a very common thing. It's common in New York, it's common in other states, to place the responsibility onto the property owners. But if there are situations where the property owners are not taking care of the snow or ice, then the city needs to go out. They are liable. They're legally liable to remove that for any injuries that are caused because they did not remove the snow and ice. And to the extent that that they are letting property owners um, not follow the city ordinance, then the city or the municipality has to go out and clear the areas that have not been cleared.
And I mean, when we're looking at it from a bottom line standpoint and the legalities of it, those things you've spoken to, and then there's the reality of people not being able to leave their homes, right? And we see this outside of snow. We see this in any season when these areas are not accessible. And let's talk a little bit about those barriers. When we think of whether or not you have the ability to actually exit your home and travel to wherever you want. It could be for a doctor's appointment, or it could be to go meet friends and have lunch. Let's talk about some of those barriers and how it is that we can address them, or they should be addressed. And why is it so significant that these barriers do exist?
Right. Well, there's a lot of conversation that can happen from that multifaceted question. Uh, you're absolutely right in that snow can become essentially a brick wall for people, an unnavigable barrier for people who have mobility disabilities, which include people who are not in a wheelchair but maybe walk, but they have an uneven gait, or they rely, they have balance issues, or they rely on another device. So we're not just talking about a subset of people with disabilities who use a wheelchair. We're talking about largely a lot of the time just the general public. There are people that wouldn't necessarily identify themselves as somebody with a mobility disability, so that it's so profound that they can't get around. But when it comes to snow and ice, very few people want to brave those conditions. Not to mention, snow and ice slip and falls can cause permanent disabilities to
Right.
begin with. So,
Right.
so for many people, it is so crucial for clear pedestrian pathways so that they can get in and out, even just in and out of their vehicle. Maybe they're going into a different neighborhood and they need to get from point A to point B, and it requires that a short section of the sidewalk is shoveled and de-iced. And if that area is not maintained in a way that is accessible to people so that it meets ADA compliance, the Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, then people can't get to where they need to go in the community. And it can be, yes, it can be a matter of, social, like sort of social interactions, but it can also be a matter of getting to medical appointments and getting life-saving care, or going to therapy and to treat mental health needs, or even getting getting to your job, or it could be any number of um, areas where you have unnavigable barriers because property owners are not doing what they need to do, and then municipalities are also not filling in the gap that they need to in order to maintain the pedestrian pathway program so it's accessible.
And you make a good point, Christy, thinking about, say, if someone is able to leave their home and use their car and get to where they need to go to, what about parking lots and when an accessible space is not available because snow has been pushed all the way into that area? Uh, what can we what can we do about that if we are a person who is unable to use a spot and the accessible spots are covered in snow?
Yeah, well, most of the time, parking lots are serving a business. And presumably many of the parking lots that we go to, certainly in upstate New York, where they're adjacent to a business, they need to be maintained by that business. Now, a lot of municipalities also have their own parking spaces, but when you're talking about a parking lot attached to a business, such as a box store or something, and they have accessible spots, that business is required to maintain those accessible spots to keep them clear from debris and snow and ice, so that somebody who is using those spots can get in and out and into the store or into the business safely. And to the extent that they're not maintained, the option is to contact the business. And then the business, if, they have the obligation to then make the space accessible. For city lots or for, on-street parking and parking that is maintained by a municipality, the inquiry as to whether or not, or I guess the inquiry or the report of inaccessible spaces goes to the municipality, city, town, what have you. A lot of cities in New York should have what are called ADA coordinators, American with Disabilities Act coordinators, and they might be in charge of ensuring that the accessible parking is accessible, as well as the pathways to and from the accessible parking. And it's really navigating that conversation with your municipality as an individual who has a disability or knows somebody who's impacted, making reports, doing everything in writing with the town, with the municipalities is very important. So getting things in email as opposed to making phone calls, that's always a best practice.
And we'll put some links in the notes of the podcast and how people can reach out to an ADA coordinator in their city or county, and some resources to find your city and county offices. And Chris, you talked a little bit about reporting. So when it comes to these areas, if a sidewalk is inaccessible or pathways are inaccessible, or parking spots are inaccessible, this is largely self-reporting, right? This is largely, we are relying on the public and those who are needing to use these areas that they can't to report. Is there any other area where anyone is keeping an eye on this? Do they look at this differently, or is it really just up to the general population to report on these issues?
Well, the Americans with Disabilities Act does provide it does require that municipalities that are covered under, it's called under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then businesses open to the public, that they maintain their spaces so that they're accessible for people with disabilities. Pedestrian pathways as a whole, as a network, as a system, they need to be maintained. And but like you said, there's no police enforcement happening. It's not, and it's not even enforcement like parking enforcement is how that's maintained in a lot of municipalities that require parking meter payments and whatnot. I mean, it is the reporting mechanisms are really fueled by the interest in the community. I mean, that's the bottom line. It in many ways, even though there's a very strong law that requires accessibility in our communities, it's all about enforcement, and that largely falls on that largely falls into the bucket of like policy issues, right? Because what is enforcement without somebody enforcing it? And that somebody is either a private citizen with a disability, or it is a regulatory agency. And in this case, it's the Department of Justice, the United States Department of Justice, and they have very limited resources. So You're absolutely right. That is the ultimate conundrum that advocates have and we're always seeing that, more and more we we have to teach people how to be effective communicators because getting into, filing a lawsuit because you can't get from point A to point B during the winter is just not feasible for most people.
Right, and the remedy is not quick. That
No.
to file a lawsuit, as we know, is not a quick solution. Um, so how to really navigate filing a complaint or reporting on things that are inaccessible? You're right. The community has to invest in this as a practice, because legal remedies certainly are not going to be timely and to help someone when they need it most. Um, and so thinking about time, and I know that it's different within different municipalities, spelled out differently. The time frames that snow should be removed or needs to be removed from areas in order for them to be accessible. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then we'll follow up with some other instances where time may not be on our side.
Yeah. Well, the city ordinances, uh, I, I don't know every single one in every single municipality in New York State, but and they vary slightly, but I think that sort of average is between at some point between 12 and 24 hours, the snow needs to be removed. Sometimes it's a matter of, well, if the snow stops falling at night, then it needs to be removed in the morning. Um, but or by the next morning or something, but essentially you're in that 12 to 24-hour range. It's because usually the city ordinances govern when snow needs to be removed. It's really something that people need to be, property owners and tenants need to be aware of what the requirements are so that you can remove the snow within the city ordinance, but within the city ordinance time allotment. But I mean, the bottom line is that people, municipalities and property owners should be removing snow as quickly as they can, whenever they can, because there are real consequences for neighbors who can't get around or people who need to travel along your property line on the pedestrian pathways along the property lines to get between places so that you can function and the world doesn't shut down as soon as we get a couple inches of snow.
Well, and that brings us to my next question. I mean, we have had a global shutdown, not due to snow, but then I also think about places like Buffalo and Rochester. And a couple of years ago, Rochester had 50 inches of snow in a very short amount of time. And as you had said earlier, like the expectation of knowing every municipality, their guidelines. We will drop all of that information in the notes of the podcast. But when I think about emergency situations or weather events, including snow, that are we don't have a lot of planning for, we might know 72 hours in advance. And I will not speak for all New Yorkers, but I will say that when we get a storm warning, we're like, well, really? Is that going to happen? We don't necessarily fully prepare for that. So we have some areas, we have some resources and tips for emergencies like this. But if we can talk a little bit more about, and some of it, will be reinforcing how snow and an excess of snow really becomes a barrier, a brick wall. It stops people from their daily lives. And in some cases, it can also be a very dire emergency given the level of barrier. Let's just talk a little bit more about that.
Well, for It varies like for different people. I think that sort of this concept of, the virtual spaces that we can get into has in many ways saved a lot of people, not only just pure frustration of having to go out in the snow, but it's also been a way to connect, to stay connected. If we can tap into the virtual, if we can tap into the public through virtual spaces, that's been very helpful for many people. And it actually has helped not, during the pandemic, but now that we're, I guess post-pandemic, it has helped on days when you cannot get out because of the snow or the weather conditions. And it's not just snow, quite frankly, that stops people with disabilities. It can be a whole host of different types of weather-related events. And as you say, planning and individuals knowing what they need when they need it is certainly something that I would suggest as a best practice. But when there is a prolonged period of time when for like 80 inches of snow would really stop you in your tracks, having yeah, being as prepared as you can sometimes just doesn't answer all of your needs when you're in that condition. And so um making sure that the municipality is aware of what the responsibilities not only of the property owner but of the municipal workers needs to be and how it needs to look in your neighborhood, that's essential, or in the neighborhoods where you need to go. um and that's another form of planning, and quite frankly, it can be a policy issue, right? Getting your elected leaders and the government officials in your municipality on board to meet your needs is a crucial step. If if your municipality, if the leaders in your city or town can listen and can ensure that your neighborhood and where you need to go is prioritized, where snow and ice can be addressed quicker, then that is ideal. I mean, yes, of course, if we have 80 inches of snow, like they're going to be compartmentalizing where they target. And of course, I'm sure they have municipalities have plans and how they address that. Certainly Buffalo has it together, right? Like even the football stadium, they were able to get volunteer citizens to come in and shovel the snow. Like, wouldn't that be great if you had that same enthusiasm after you got 5 feet of snow to go out and clear the downtown area of
Right.
Buffalo to make sure that people could get around? I mean, even that, I think that what happened in Buffalo the past month was really um it really showed some possibilities of how to get interest from the community to get out there, not only to do something fun. I mean, that was a bit unique, right? Like they had a game, they had to remove all the snow, and then they it was like a rare opportunity for the community to get in the stadium when there was like so much snow.
Right.
But this could also, towns could create fun, enthusiastic programs that help people um, get out in the snow. People who are able to get out there with their shovels, remove a lot of what needs to be removed along the sidewalk, and then also it improves the community around you, and maybe revives people during the dark days of winter time.
That's so true. The stadium body shoveling was something that I have not seen before, and it was funny. I mean, it was definitely unique. Um, and I think you're right. If we could transfer that excitement and that sense of purpose into all other communities, we could definitely see some changes in this area.
I just hope that it would be more effective less in the stadium. That removing snow from sidewalks is probably a lot easier than removing it from many different chairs in the stadium while people are partying and making snow slides down to the
slides.
field.
And a lot of them didn't have, they weren't fully clothed. They didn't have shirts on, which was, I still don't, we're in Albany, in the Albany area, and the thought of being that far north and playing in the snow like that, really, that's not something I would be able to do
Yeah.
personally. Well, Christy, thank you so much for talking with us today about this. If there's anything else that you would like to talk to us about in terms of barriers and snow, let us know.
Yeah. No, I just encourage everybody to make sure that they know what their responsibility is and also have fun with, with accessibility. Snow is fun. I mean, if you bundle up, it's possible to enjoy the winter weather and to build community around um, something that helps your neighbors.
I think that's a great note to end on. Christy, thank you so much for your time today. I always enjoy speaking with you, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you.
Empire State of Rights has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed our program, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post. The video for this episode is available on our YouTube channel with closed captioning and ASL interpretation. If there is a subject you would like us to discuss, please email podcast@drny.org or comment below. For more Empire State of Rights, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.